How is Netflix bringing spatial audio into every lounge room? And how are Aussie telcos cracking down on SMS scams? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and this week I'm not joined by Alex Kidman, a man who's been struck down by the spicy flu. So it's time for my long-awaited supply chain special. Yes! No, he'll kill me. I better not. So, with Alex cashing in on his sick leave, we decided to call in longtime friend of the show, Leigh Stark, to sit in the big chair. Leigh, how are you enjoying the free snacks in the employee lounge room?
There are snacks? I thought these were paint chips.
Yeah, they're not the best, are they?
Oh, thanks for letting me be here again.
So speaking of high budgets, this week, no expense spared, we're joined by the king of home entertainment tech at Sound+Image editor, Jez Ford. Jez, welcome back to the show. Have you managed to avoid the dreaded Logie so far?
No, I had it a few weeks ago. I went to the UK, got it on the plane coming back, the flu and the COVID at the same time. What a joy.
Oh, that's a double banger. That's nasty.
But we're well better now. It's losing my hearing that does it for me because I have to stop work.
Yeah, that is
the upside
rough.
is you can start reviewing hearing aids.
Yeah.
I think we're all getting closer to the point where we could just be doing that anyway.
Something like that. Oh, sad. That's so sad.
So this week we're looking at Netflix's plan to bring immersive spatial audio into even the humblest of lounge rooms and what that means for the future of home entertainment. But first, new rules are in place forcing Aussie telcos to crack down on SMS scams. Leigh, what's the story here?
So basically, telcos have kind of been working on reducing SMS scams on their network in general. Now it's just effectively that the major communications body is kind of saying everyone actually do it. Telstra's been proactive about it in months and years previous. They've got a project called Cleaner Pipes, which kind of deals with this both in voice and in SMS. The problem being, yeah, it's a burden for consumers, absolutely, but it's also a problem for the network. So all the extra silly SMSs that go on the system are kind of wasting its resources, wasting its time, and also putting consumers in danger for clicking on them because there's obviously a ton of scams, FluBot, all sorts of things. FluBot's been taken down, which is great, but there's a whole lot of other things. I mean, you really can't go a week without having an SMS sent to you. And even if you're on Telstra and I'm on Telstra, I'm still getting those SMS scams coming in. So Telstra's been doing it. Optus and Vodafone, my understanding is that they have been doing it, but they're not as proactive in talking about it per se. So this is kind of more, I guess, the telecommunications body saying, you have to do it. There's no choice. Please protect consumers.
It was interesting that ACMA was saying that they think that the effective crackdown on spam calls has then seen spammers and scammers turn more to SMS. Jess, how does that line up with what you've seen on your mobile phone, home phone, in terms of scam messages?
Well, it's a lot quicker, isn't it, for one thing, to send an SMS and see if you get a response rather than sit there making all the cold calls. And there's been a movement, hasn't there, for people to deliberately waste their time because every 15 minutes you can keep them on your call is 15 minutes they're not phoning some granny in Queensland. So it makes sense to get a spam text, but can they stop them in real time, really? How well can they do this?
The process is all AI driven. So effectively what they're doing is looking for patterns in the message, the way it's set up, the positioning of the URL. I mean, there are certain things people can do to be aware. The scammers are getting very good. I mean, keep in mind, they're just using digital systems, online SMS senders in bulk to make these things happen. If there are things you can do, for instance, to not click. One is to obviously not trust everything you see. That's the obvious one, and that's one telcos are kind of adapting to, but another one is the send IDs. Send IDs are when you see things like ATO or JB Hi-Fi sitting at the top of your send, and typically most telcos know how to actually respond to the ones that don't have that. If they're sending an SMS that looks like it's going to be a scam and it doesn't have a send ID attached, great. The reason why that's important is most of these digital SMS services actually have blocks in place on the companies. You can't be Telstra, you can't be JB Hi-Fi, you can't be ATO, that sort of thing. But you can get really similar names that confuse the systems. You can't be Telstra, but you can be Telstra Broadband. You can't be Telstra, but you can be Telstra Net. So there are loopholes for scammers to use, and some of these things are getting through the cracks, and that's a lot of where this comes from. The other side of things is that we used to criticize scammers for having the most atrocious English skills in the world, and they're still pretty bad, but they're getting better. I've seen some really realistic ones in the past few weeks that even I would be hard-pressed knowing the difference between. And if you get a bit.ly, I can tell you one of the coolest things you can do if you get a link that has a bit.ly link and says, click this. If it says bit.ly and you copy that into your URL or your web browser, you don't hit enter at that point, but hit a plus on the end, it will actually unmask that URL and show you what's behind it. And that's typically how these things work. They're all about shortening the URLs. If you get a bit.ly, you can unmask it. There are a few others you can unmask, but most people don't know these techniques. And my understanding of the scam analysis stuff that telcos are using is it doesn't necessarily look at that because it'd be a real-time scan in general. The idea is more to understand the patterns and the heuristics of what make these SMS scams do the things they do and block them before they get a chance to penetrate the network. That's effectively what's supposed to be going on. Is it working? Telstra says they're blocking hundreds of thousands, but roughly millions a month. I think they're up to about 8 million in the past 3 or 4 months. Whether or not that's actually working perfectly, the understanding I have is that you're getting less, but you're probably still getting quite a few. And so they're encouraging Telstra, as I assume it's the same with Optus and Vodafone, they're encouraging people to forward them on to Telstra when you get them so they can train their systems just to be a little bit better.
That actually sounds remarkably hopeful. I always thought I was very good at this, well, it's unusual in a privacy situation for anything to sound hopeful, isn't it? But
Yeah, sure.
I thought I was quite good at this, but I've been called out once in the last week by one of my companies I deal with fake spamming me to see if anybody in their building would click on it. And I did. And I got another one, which was personally addressed from my boss asking me to go get gift cards. I mean, I recognize that as spam, but sent to my home email, tying up my identity to my boss's identity. So it's alarming how, easy they make it look real.
That one sounds like
the
they got inside. That's called a business email compromise scam, where they get inside a business's email and then email someone pretending to be the big boss saying, can you transfer this money or whatever? And you go, well, gee, that's the big boss. I better do it.
Yeah, but not actually from his email.
It can actually go deeper than that because they could easily extract his phone number from your email, from that email, and spoof his phone number as an SMS. And that's why these things are getting seriously complex. I think my wife was saying to me the other day, should I just block these numbers? And theoretically, yes, you can block the numbers, but the downside is they could actually be legitimate numbers that might one day need to contact you. It's unlikely because there's millions and millions of numbers out there, but they could actually come from someone real that you might need to talk to, and that's the problem. The issue of training an AI to actually understand and break down these scams is it shouldn't be on the part of the regular person to block all these things because, again, we might need these calls, we might need these numbers. There's so many factors. That's why it's so dependent on telcos to do all this stuff. It's happening everywhere, by the way. It's not just Australia. My understanding of some of the stuff Telstra's using is actually used in Singapore as well. So it's not just a local problem, it's an international problem.
We went through this with spam email as well. And I remember there was a point where the stat would always come out, spam accounts for 30% of all email, 40% of all email, 50% of all email. And it looked like an insurmountable problem. But you don't hear so much about spam and you don't hear about spam filtering in the last, say, decade or so. And I think it's just because the technology has gotten good enough that for most things it's under control. Would you say that that's...
Well, we have spam filter. It doesn't matter what mail program you're using
Oh,
or
yeah,
what
they're
mail
there,
service.
but no one makes a big deal about them anymore because they seem to do
we
the
have
job.
spam filters. They're doing things. We don't have spam filters on our SMS. Our SMS is stuff just comes in and that's where it goes. And if you have an Android phone, you probably have a phone analysis thing where it's just checking a database, and if it comes in, it can actually tell you whether it's a nuisance call or not. My understanding is iPhone's getting something like that quite soon. But the idea of SMS scams, SMS just come in, and everyone thinks that your phone number is sacred, but your phone number is not any more sacred than your email address. If you can get an email scam, you can get an SMS scam, because your phone number is out there on a marketing database that has been leaked numerous times. And even if it's not, and my favorite one at the moment is somehow receiving SMS scams that come from numbers very similar to mine. And the only logic I have for that is that scammers are trying to send the same scam out to numerous numbers related to mine with this crazy belief that I would somehow respond to a phone number remarkably similar to mine for no apparent reason. But they're trying it. And it's working, because I've had colleagues and readers write to me asking me if this is legit and why they're getting a message from a number remarkably similar to theirs.
I'm going back to my landline.
It's
Well, you
safer that
can't.
way.
Every time the landline rings, you know that's a scammer. You know that's what's it, Barbara or whoever it was from the NBN ringing you up to tell you you're about to be cut off.
100%.
I got a
yeah.
legit call today, and I almost hung up on it. It was a robocall from the library because my kids have got overdue books. And
Oh,
I
that's
almost
definitely a
I
scam.
thought-
Just don't click on the phishing
yeah,
links for
I
that.
thought I better hang on just for wait for them to say NBN, and it's like, oh no, local library. Okay, that one's legit.
Oh, I don't think scammers have really cottoned onto the idea of being a local library. Yeah, you've just given them a
That's
brand new
damn
idea
it.
that's
And
going
I've
to work.
I've just spoiled it for everyone.
You
Sorry.
have fines that you need to pay.
Trust no one. Do you think that the same way with email, how you got a spam folder, a junk mail folder? I'm not quite sure how you'd implement that with SMS, but some way for SMSs to be flagged, whether it be in a folder or something. So your telco says, look, before you even look at this, we're pretty sure it's spam. For those ones that they're not 100% sure they want to, it's not black and white. We think it's spam. We don't want to delete it because it could be legit, but we're just giving you a heads up. Maybe don't trust this one.
I can see phones maybe introducing something like that, like an extra folder that where it doesn't know how to class things. But I think it's still really dependent on the telco, because again, it's not just it's a nuisance to the telco, but it's also wasting its resources. I mean, it's wasting the strength of whatever the network is. So it is really dependent on telcos to at least try it, whether or not they get it right. I mean, Telstra's trying it, and I'm a Telstra subscriber and I still get loads of SMS scams. So it's clearly not nailing it 100%. But I don't see phones as being the problem here. With email, it's easily controlled. You've got so many emails coming in and you can label them. With SMS, you typically don't. How many SMS do you get in a day? 3, 4 if you're lucky. With emails, you get hundreds. So I don't think it's a problem of the phone or the inbox or anything like that. I think this is a telco thing that needs to be solved. Will iPhone, will Apple and Google and Samsung do a better job of it eventually? Probably. They might find a different way of doing it. But right now, I just lay blame entirely at the telco. Leave this out of consumers' hands. Let telcos solve this mess.
So, Jez, this week Netflix is getting very excited that it's offering us something called spatial audio. Now, what exactly is spatial audio, and how is Netflix doing it?
Spatial audio, as it's being used sort of widely by Apple and now Netflix, they're talking about getting a sense of a surround field from stereo, just 2 channels, whether it's on headphones or 2 speakers in front of you, somehow being able to spread that sound around the room. It's nothing new to try to do that. There's a long history of technologies that have tried to do that. But this particular one is called Ambio, and it's got Sennheiser behind it. And Sennheiser's been building up with Ambio for a decade or more. So it's interesting to see exactly how well this is going to work, because Sennheiser's a relatively trusted name in audio. It's not just another codec.
So I've played around with spatial audio on Apple Gear with headphones, and that's the kind of thing where if I'm staring at my computer on my iPhone and then I turn my head left or right, it sounds to me as if the sound is still coming from in front of me. Leigh, that's not what we're talking about here, is it?
No, not quite. What you're talking about is head tracked spatial audio. So it's something specific to Apple and Beats products and iPhone specifically. It doesn't work with Android devices. What we're talking about is, I guess, as Jess said, it's kind of like a recreation of a room, but where we normally do that with 3D sound sort of system. So Dolby Atmos, DTSX, with speakers that fire up and bounce sound around you, or if you have a lot of money, actual speakers around you. Most of my readers don't have that much money. I don't know many readers who probably do. Jez has given me the thumbs up to know that there are readers who probably do. While you can create that sort of 3D sound with speakers, most people don't have those sorts of systems. And so there's a pretty significant push by speaker makers to somehow recreate the feeling of 3D spatial sound, of room-based sound, in a smaller sound system. You're finding it one of two ways at the moment. You find a type of Atmos spatial sound called psychoacoustic, which the marketers don't like talking about, but that's what it actually is. It's your brain being tricked into hearing a three-dimensional sound. It's part of the Sonos Beam Gen
Sounds like
2.
some kind of a CIA black bag operation. I'm not surprised they don't want to use that name.
Yeah, it's the technical term for what it is psychoacoustic. What it actually is sound. The theory is 3D sound fired at slightly different, very small intervals trick your brain into feeling that you're actually listening to sound in a larger room. It only works when you're facing forward. So psychoacoustic sound is how TVs that say they've got Atmos do 3D sound. It tricks your brain into hearing a larger scape, and it's spatial because it's a wider emulation. It's basically an emulation of a room with the soundtrack in it. Sennheiser's approach here is kind of like that. What the plan on this one is, instead of needing that 3D soundbar or that psychoacoustic 3D soundbar, which is less expensive, you can take your regular TV speaker system or a 2-channel stereo or even a 2-channel soundbar. There are loads of old ones like that. And it will use basically a soundtrack on Netflix, on specifically Netflix movies, and it's a wider scope. It's a wider stage. It's supposed to sound spatial. It's basically been engineered to sound a little bit wider, and so it appears only on a set amount of Netflix films. It's different from what you're getting on Apple Music, because when you hear spatial soundtracks, there are made-for-purpose ones, which are these, and also made-for-purpose Dolby Atmos music mixes, which are actually different music mixes engineered to be spatial. And then there's the stuff that is upsampled to be that way, and Apple has a lot of music that it can upsample to do that. And basically, all it does is expands the scope, expands how you listen to it. It's supposed to feel like you're in a room listening to it. I guess kind of, Jez, maybe like a binaural sound, I guess?
No, it is binaural in its origins. This is how Ambio started. They started trying to make VR sets and AR sets. They actually started doing 9.1 channel music as Ambio, and then progressed into
that now.
Progressed into the VR market, and then did the soundbar. And all this was working out how they could use binaural is when you record with microphones and a dummy head. So the whole point about the psychoacoustic way of manipulating the sound is that it's mimicking how the brain hears sound from behind your ears, the shape of your ears, all the rest of it.
Scammer on line 1?
It's Scammer on line 1. So the way that a lot of sound bars do it is they don't do that at all. They just phase a bit and they just throw the sound wider, and that's awful. That just destroys your central dialogue and just makes it sound wide and fake. What Sennheiser is doing here, and this is critical, is that they're giving the Hollywood sound mixers an automatic down mix. It goes from the Dolby Atmos mix to a stereo mix, which maintains that surround integrity. And the guy doesn't even have to be there. Normally, they have to do a whole different stereo mix. They won't have to do that anymore. They can press the button. They can decide how much of the Ambio effect they can fold in. You can have full Ambio, or you can bring it back and reduce that binaural effect and get more of a flat stereo. But the point is, you don't have to remix it.
And you get the experience on a regular 2-channel system, which is also what's so critical about this. Normally, you'd have to upgrade to a new soundbar or a full amp speaker system, whereas this you don't. You can tune in on your TV, and it might automatically just make your TV sound a little bit better. I'm not going to say that much better because every TV is different and every speaker system is different, but it will increase the scope of what you're listening to.
That's exactly right. And as they point out, there are millions more stereo systems that people use for listening to TV than there are surround systems. So if you can improve the stereo sound, it's a great leap forward.
So, Jez, you've spent time with the real, we'll say, surround sound systems with a ridiculous amount of speakers spread around the room, behind the couch, in the ceiling, the whole thing. How close can what we're talking about come to replicating the real deal?
I do, and I'm loving the revolution in spatial audio, because with Apple's spatial audio surround mixes, I can just plug the Apple TV 4K into my surround system, and all that music now is in surround. It is just fantastic, and that's there's a slight compression to it. because they're pushing the channels through the same amount of bandwidth. But it's sounding gorgeous. In terms of getting that on headphones, look, I'm a non-believer up until very recently that you can get very little. How many soundbars have I tested? How many headphones have I tested? You don't get sound behind you from two channels until somebody plugged me in 2 weeks ago to a thing called the Interrogation Chamber, which is a YouTube video which was made by
again to the CIA if they're listening.
It's really odd. It was made by Swedish students about a decade ago in a technical university in Stockholm, and it's the best rear surround I've ever heard from headphones.
Now I'm going to have to go dig this out.
Yeah, it's really weird because and some of it's I didn't listen to the end. They say it gets quite nasty, and it's all Swedish guys pretending to be torturers. It's very strange, but the surround effect is better than I've ever heard. So now I'm convinced.
Was that a recording that did that, or was it actual hardware that did it?
No, it's a binaural recording. You can play it on YouTube and listen on any headphones. Yeah. Just a binaural dummy head recording they made, but quite the best I've heard.
So weirdly, I was going to say one of the things that got me more into Atmos was trying to engineer it in Logic and taking tracks I had and specifically trying to engineer them in Atmos so you could hear what was happening around you. And if you actually look up picker.com.au on Apple Music or Spotify, you'll find a track that sounds horrible in stereo because of an accident I did because I didn't realize the mixes were totally different, and sounds actually okay in Atmos. But those things that Jez is talking about, when you have those sorts of techniques that you can do, those really cool fun things you can do by setting up head position and height, it does change the sound totally.
It's such an experience.
If I'm sitting at home and I've got my normal television with just 2 speakers in it, and I think, I don't need all those big speakers anymore because what I've got is as good as that fancy high-end system, I would imagine that's not the case. How close can this kind of technology get to actually having 9.2 speakers, whatever it is, around the room?
30%.
It's an intro. It's like a starter package. It's no different from getting the taster of something and going, well, maybe if I upgrade, I'll get something better. It's a taster. And what's good about this effort, there are catches to it. What's good about this effort is that most people are reluctant to spend on sound and always spend on the TV, which it should be the exact opposite. I mean, we're not just sound junkies telling you this. The sound is the most critical part. The video's great, don't get me wrong, but your TV is going to last you forever. Getting great sound is the more critical thing. You can live with a full HD picture for ages. You're not going to get a tremendous amount of difference when you upgrade to 4K. And if you upgrade to 4K now, upgrading through TV varieties isn't going to give you a lot of difference unless you OLED versus LED backlit, whatever. But sound is critical because sound can totally change your experience completely.
I've got 2 rooms for watching video in my house. One's got an amazing sound system with a small screen, and the other's got a huge screen with a lesser sound system. And movies are better with a smaller screen and a better sound system.
So it's a starter pack, to be honest, Adam. And that we've seen efforts like this in recent years. I mean, Sennheiser, Sonos has its Ray, which is it's basically a pint-sized version of its play bar from years ago, and it's a $300 or $400 soundbar meant for people to upgrade to who have mediocre sound but want a starter pack. To be honest, it's good. It's a great entry level sort of thing, but there are so many other great soundbars or speaker systems you can go to. But again, it's just kind of like a starter pack. This is a really cool approach to exposing the Ambio name, which again, Sennheiser doesn't have a lot of soundbars. It's got a $4,000 soundbar, which is where the Ambio thing draws its name from. And as Jez said, it has mic systems that you wear for video and for audio. I mean, its Ambio stuff has largely been professional driven. So you just know that this approach is partly inspired to get people more aware of Sennheiser's Ambio and probably what's coming next. I'm hearing from the grapevine that there is a lot of stuff coming. That being said, Sennheiser has a great name, but it's not one connected with soundbars in a huge way. That $4,000 Sennheiser soundbar is amazing, but it's a $4,000 soundbar, and you're talking the sort of pricing now that a lot of people would rather spend on an amp and proper speakers.
Sennheiser is in a confusing place at the moment because the consumer division, which owns that soundbar, has been sold to a Swiss company that makes medical devices and is now manufacturing consumer Sennheiser headphones in Ireland. And so that's rather confusing. The soundbar was also co-engineered by Neumann guys, including
Oh
Wolf,
wow,
and
that makes a lot of sense now.
and Neumann has just bought Merging Technologies, which are massively into mixing desks and professional audio. So they're combining and separating in strange ways. They're talking about a smaller Ambio soundbar before the end of the year, but that'll presumably come from the Swiss company. We don't really know whether Ambio has now joined up back at Sennheiser HQ as goes with the consumer versus the professional. But what's happening at Netflix is all from the professional. They're getting big into mixers. They want to own the whole production chain from mixing through to speakers and have Ambio as a common theme.
And what Sennheiser told me about the use of Ambio was that it was, they basically said that spatial audio has been used by all the big players, but Ambio is about their immersive product. So it is to be used for marketing. So it does kind of scream that more will be on the way, because when you see Sennheiser Ambio attached to this label, you're just going to know, well, that's the soundbar I should be upgrading to. To answer your question, will it make it sound more like a room? It'll improve it, but it's not going to be necessarily the be all end all. Worth noting is that it's actually replacing the original sound mix on Netflix. This is a question I was really curious about. So the quote I got was that they're saying it's better than the stereo mix, but it is replacing the original stereo mix with the Ambio version. So it only applies, for instance, to Netflix productions. You're not going to find Blade Runner, for instance, and go, I have to listen to the Ambio version as opposed to the original mix that's on Netflix. And again, the version of Netflix you subscribe to, you can get Atmos on the expensive one, but you'll just get standard stereo on the less expensive one. This one is giving you Ambio stereo, if effectively like presumed virtual spatial stereo on the stereo version. However, if you've been listening to Stranger Things 4 or some of the other movies that are on Netflix that have this, I think there's a version of Resident Evil coming that's got it. It means you don't get a choice but to listen to the Ambio version. So if you do like your movies in a stereo recreation and that's the system you have, tough, because this replaces the standard stereo mix. It's a down mix.
But the idea is that there won't be a stereo mix. They won't do a separate stereo mix. There'll only be the multi-channel Dolby Atmos, and then it'll auto down mix to stereo. They can listen if they like, but they don't have to. So they just won't do a separate stereo mix. So it won't be something you're losing. You're just getting this one.
So I've got an LG OLED, and it does Dolby Atmos. I mean, how much Dolby Atmos it can do with just two speakers, I don't know.
It's
but
virtual. It's psychoacoustic.
It's virtual. So, but if I've got that switched, actually got that switched off, because I think it screws up the rest of my surround sound system if I have it switched on. But if I had that switched on and I was listening to watching Netflix through the television, I would then be getting the Atmos soundtrack. I wouldn't be getting this Ambio soundtrack. What do you need to do to make sure that you're hearing that you're hearing the Ambio soundtrack?
If you've got the top Netflix plan so that you can get the full Dolby Atmos soundtrack, that'll go to your TV in Dolby Atmos. You can you switch the soundtrack? I don't think you can on Netflix.
No, you can't. That's actually the point. You can't switch the soundtrack on Netflix, or at least away from this version. So if you're on the cheaper plan, you'll get the stereo version with Atmos mixing, or the stereo Ambio version.
Yeah.
And if you're on the 4K one, you'll get the standard Dolby Atmos one.
But if I'm listening to that on a stereo system, the down mixing is happening in the television, and then I'm missing out on the stereo I could have from the fun Ambio version.
This is one of the reasons I asked about that mixing, because you can on iTunes, for instance, pick what sort of mix you're listening to, 5.1 Atmos. So you do have choices. I don't know if services have. I'm kind of curious now to open up every service that I, for some reason, pay for and just find out if they let you switch. My guess is no, because the majority of times when these things are there, you can change languages, but having an extra mix for audio seems very unlikely.
Yeah,
I think not unnecessary, but unlikely.
The other thing I realized could happen is that a lot of soundbars are built to take a stereo signal and flange it up so it sounds good. If they now take a stereo signal, which is an Ambio stereo signal, which has got its own binaural information, and they flange that up, you're double flanging.
Pre-flanged.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm curious about now with something like the Beam, because the Beam is specifically psychoacoustic. I'm completely misusing a Beam. It's sitting there as a soundbar for my computer at the moment. But you can theoretically, like that's a really good point, Jez. You could actually take the the psychoacoustic, the Sennheiser Ambio stereo signal, to run it into the beam, which has its own chip to automatically upscale into a virtualized psychoacoustic Ambio. My gut is it's not going to do a whole lot of difference, because the theory about this whole upscaling into Atmos is that it's doing is really expanding the signal and firing timings ever so slightly different. You can't turn a standard stereo signal into a spatial one and get it all right. It's just not going to do the same thing. You're not positioning speakers around the room. You're not firing things at different times. It's not the same. It's a starter pack. It's not going to be the exact same experience. It's just to make your TV and movie viewing a little bit more fun, and to inspire you to say, hey, maybe I should upgrade to a different sound system. That's really what it's there for. I think from Netflix's point, it's about to say, hey, maybe I should upgrade to the more expensive Netflix plan, which will suit you better.
Do any of the other streaming services do anything like this? I mean, I know they all offer, well, a lot of them offer surround sound of some description, and probably Atmos might be thrown in there in the high-end plans, but any of them doing any kind of fancy stereo, I guess?
Fancy stereo, not that I know. Certainly there's plenty of surround from the other providers, from Disney Plus and Stan and so forth, yeah.
Yeah, Disney Plus and Amazon Prime are the ones that do Atmos standard. So they do Atmos and 4K standard. So if you get an Apple TV 4K or whatever you want to connect, Atmos and 4K become standard on Prime, Apple TV Plus, and Disney Plus. Off the top of my head, Paramount's Full HD, Binge's Full HD Max.
Don't tell me you subscribe to all of these.
I subscribe to all of these. In a world of inflation, I'm screwed.
Question without notice: is Paramount just stereo sound? Because I watch Star Trek on it, and I think I'm always struggling to get 5-channel sound out of it.
I think it's stereo, but I haven't checked. It definitely works in the virtualized. If you're wearing Apple headphones on an iPad, I've definitely gotten that working before. But that has more to do with the Apple headphones than it does, I think, the Paramount app. I think it's the app that's the problem on this, to be honest. The Paramount app's garbage.
Yeah.
But no one else is really upscaling audio to be spatial, except for Apple Music. So Apple Music is the one catch on this. So Apple Music has two sets of spatial music. It's got the spatial music that is engineered this way, which is a different mix. It's just something I didn't realize when I started to mix my own stuff, which is why some of my audio sounds absolutely awful in stereo, but fantastic in Atmos. I'll fix that later on, I swear. However,
we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, absolutely. Just everything else.
If you put it through Ambio, it'll give you a perfect stereo mix automatically. That's the point of it.
Yeah, but Apple also does have an upscaled version, so you can actually go on your iPhone or an iPad and set everything through Apple Music to be played with that head track spatial audio. And what I understand about this, and I don't know how readily known it is. Every time I have a discussion with sound people, they seem confused that I even know this. My understanding is Apple does this in the cloud. So they take the original track, they run it through what is basically a spatializer, and they're able to create a virtual head track feeling. What Jez is saying before about how you're not really a convert until you've experienced it in a way that really changes you. Jez has been around way more speakers and way more fantastic sound systems than I have, so much so that he's probably got a speaker system that's worth more than my house in his room somewhere, in his house somewhere. However, for me, for experiencing this sort of stuff was like life-changing, was hearing the Beatles and knowing I could hear different things in the background. I probably could have heard, to be honest, if I had used a better speaker system or a better pair of headphones, but you get what you can. However, those tracks were re-engineered and reproduced as part of Atmos, and so they sounded different with the right pair of headphones. Now, when you get standard stereo music and you upscale it, it doesn't do that. You're getting a head tracked version that's kind of cool, semi-virtual, feels good, but to be completely honest, you'd be better off with the stereo version that doesn't change position when you move your head as opposed to heads. We're not all Jez Ford people, Brox. However, the whole concept of this is that stuff in Atmos and spatial audio, which is a technology I love talking about because people are just unaware of it, sounds better when it's engineered for it. That's why Apple Music and Amazon's got it in America as well. It's not just Apple. Apple Music in 4K or in spatial is great. Tidal running through a high-end soundbar or speaker system on an Apple TV 4K is magic. I swear once Alex Kidman hears Prince in Tidal through a high-res
Game
speaker
over.
system,
Yeah.
he'll never look at anything ever again. It comes to do with the recording, which is also why the Sennheiser thing is so interesting, because it's not an upscaled system. You're getting a starter pack, but it's a starter pack made for purpose.
So, Jez, it seems to me that in the history of audio and audio formats, there are more things that have flopped than have actually taken off. And I think maybe it's
Mini
because
disc.
not even that, but just different using different channels, using different mixes. And I think maybe it's because the technology's not there. People don't have the hardware. People aren't ready for it. It's a solution to a problem that nobody had. Where are we with this technology, Jez? Do you think that what we're talking about here is something that people want, or is this another fad?
I think it's got the support of names like Apple and Netflix. I think it's got a good chance of getting a better foot in the door. Then again, we say the same thing about 3D TV every 15 years. It rolls around, doesn't it? Everybody jumps on it, and then everybody jumps off again. So, yeah, I still like 3D TV, and my copy of Gravity will never be the same. I've got nowhere to watch it now. Gravity in 3D. No, look, we've had many binaural systems. We had, what was the one on the Madonna album, Q Sound, on the very early Madonna collection, and Pink Floyd's used ambisonics and so forth. So long as they work on any two-channel system, they will never go out of date, and there's no reason not to do it. It's only if you need special, like Bluetooth LDAC, where you need it at both ends of the system, or blah, 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 where you end up hardly ever using it because you've got to have both parts of a system with the same technology in it. But in terms of like Ambio, which is go out through any two-channel system, there's no reason not to have it. Same as you can still play an Ambisonics Pink Floyd LP now and enjoy the sort of surround on that.
It's worth noting, by the way, that the spatial versions that we've got, whether it's the spatial that you're hearing on Apple Music or through Ambio, they're not the only ones. Sony still pushes one out, Sony 360 Reality Audio. It's only supported on Sony headphones. It's not head tracked. It's basically just an expanded soundtrack. That's all. It's just a bigger soundstage that for some reason has to analyze your ear by photos, which honestly still makes no sense to me because it doesn't change anything. I think it's a gimmick. I can see Jay shaking his head.
I think it's a disaster. Everything you listen to in stereo of Sony 360 stuff just is mushed up. It's like they've taken the sound field, thrown it up in the air, and let it land where it will. It's a really bizarre format to put out on a consumer service.
And there are speakers for it as well, and they don't really like. I've tried their speakers. I've tried generating the 360-degree sphere, and I'll be completely honest. Having a Sonos soundbar in the front of me and behind me, which is the way my room is configured, sounds way more three-dimensional, and it's not supposed to be than the Sony 360 ones. But that's the point. There are different versions of this. There are 360-degree soundscapes that you can experience in virtual headsets. They're not made to. That's just your brain tricking you because you're seeing a headset as your head moves and hearing a stereo. But the software is effectively controlling what you hear based off your head's position. So there's lots of different approaches. So far, what we're seeing in the use of the Dolby Atmos brand on music services and also in movie services, plus the Ambio stuff, seem to be the best approaches we have. I don't see them going out of style for a while because they're in use and they're actively getting used. They're being promoted in proper ways. 360 Reality Audio is not. Nobody's using it. It's on one service in Australia, Tidal, and I know one journalist who pays for it. I used to, and I don't because there's just no reason to anymore. If it's not commonly available and it's not easily accessible, and more importantly, if you're not hearing anything different, we have this conversation about FLAC and lossless and ALAC all the time, and it's this. You can probably hear a difference if you know what you're looking for, but specialists are pretty much that niche. So if you can't hear what you're looking for, most people won't pay for it.
That's not what high res is about. I think high res is enormously misunderstood as being, it's got more information than you can possibly hear. High res is about having a bucket so freaking huge you're not going to miss anything. That's what it's about. It's about not throwing anything away. Why throw anything away when we don't have to these days? We've got plenty of streaming bandwidth. We've got plenty of space to store it. If we can have a huge file that's got everything that was recorded at the studio, why wouldn't you have that? Unless they charge $1 million for it, in which case you don't want it.
I think my point was less about that. I don't disagree with you. My point is that if most people can't hear it, they won't buy into it. And audiophiles are a different bunch.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And I must say, with all the audio formats and the different way and the spatial audio, anything that gets everybody listening to more music in different ways, I mean, that's just fantastic. It's anything that gets the music out there is improving lives.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Leigh for sitting in the big chair.
Thank you for not feeding me paint chips.
And thanks to Jez for joining us again.
Thank you, although I didn't appreciate the small chair.
So, Jez, it's been a while since you've been on the show, so it's time for you to face the painted Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom.
I always get it wrong, by the way. I always get it wrong.
And you can't have Star Trek Voyager as the answer to any of these questions.
Or Star Trek Enterprise, apparently.
Or Star Trek Enterprise. Wait until the end. Let me give you all 3 questions and then answer them in any order you see fit. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question of the moment, what's the worst thing you've ever spent your own money on?
What's the worst thing I've ever spent my own money on? Oh, my
Star
God.
Trek Enterprise box set.
Okay, let's go through. I've got a HD DVD box set of Star Trek, which is obviously no use at all. Series 1, the remasters, they did them on Blu-ray and on HD DVD, and I just don't have an HD DVD player anymore.
I can send you one.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have the phaser Star Trek phaser remote control that came with it.
That was worth buying just for that.
That was worth buying.
That is
just
money
for that,
well spent.
So having ruined that answer, I'll say I'm online at whathifi.com these days, at Sound+Image's corner of whathifi.com. And Twitter is really the main social interaction for me. I keep Facebook for friends, and that's about it.
And where can people find you on Twitter?
At /Jez Ford.
Nice. Keep it simple. And as always, you can find us online at verticalhold.au on Twitter, or at verticalhold.com.au, or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page. And as always, thanks for dropping by and giving us a listen in on what we hope is stereo. We'll see how it comes out in the wash. Thanks for your great reviews, and help us to continue to spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
I knew at one point I'd trigger you. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was like, at one point, the guy who knows more about sound is going to go, "F you, Leigh. No way."
Yeah. No, I was waiting to see we go.